Yapura narrative fully paraphrase, Kark copyright free bana dia gaya hai. Mat lab bilkul same raka gaya hai. Koibat hai nahi ki. Or exactly 20 paragraphs main split kar dia hai. The pen only rested on the paper for a few moments, yet the choice would shape Prince Harry's remaining years. In private, King Charles gave final approval to a permanent royal command that shut his younger son out of every official state occasion from that point forward. Coronations, national memorials, diplomatic gatherings, and any ceremony carried out in the name of the crown were all placed beyond Harry's reach. This was not a temporary measure or a mild warning. It was the most painful decision a father could make while exercising the full power of the monarch. Charles read the closing lines of the document twice before signing. A sovereign order is simply a formal instruction issued under the king's authority, and this particular one locked Harry out of every public event where the crown spoke for the nation. State banquets, remembrance services, diplomatic receptions, military ceremonies, and future coronations were now permanently closed to him. The senior private secretary stood quietly across the desk while the king held the pen still for a long moment, then signed without speaking. The quiet that followed felt heavy. Charles took off his glasses, pressed his fingers to his eyes, and asked whether any root back remained in the wording. The secretary replied carefully that only a new sovereign order could undo what had just been done. That answer mattered because the decision was no longer tied to anger or temporary emotion. It had become part of the fixed machinery of the monarchy, built to last longer than the feelings that produced it. William received his own sealed copy in another room. The Prince of Wales, heir to the throne, did not open the envelope at once. He looked at it for a while, then asked whether his brother had already been informed. When he learned the answer was no, his expression hardened. He realized Harry was still living in the last few minutes before his official future changed forever. Camilla watched Charles set the pen down yet keep his hand resting on the paper. As queen consort, she saw what the officials around him would not say out loud. The king had defended the institution by wounding himself. The order drew a hard boundary. Harry could still be his son in private life, but he would never again stand with the monarchy during an active state occasion. A messenger collected the sealed package and left the study. Far away, Harry still knew nothing. His phone stayed silent. No advance notice had reached him. The door had already closed, and before the order even arrived, everyone closest to the crown would have to confront what that signature had altered and what it had revealed about the family behind the institution. To the watching public, the decision looked like firm royal discipline. Inside the family, it felt far more painful. Charles was not simply keeping a distant duke away from ceremonies. He was removing his own son from the very moments that define a reign. William now stood between a hurt father and a distant brother while Harry faced the prospect that every future chapter of royal history would unfold without him. Charles understood the risk on both sides. The monarchy could not continue if private family disputes kept overflowing into official state events, because those ceremonies were meant to show national continuity rather than personal conflict. At the same time, the king feared history would remember only the harshness of the signature. A state function is an official event carried out for the country and the crown, and it had been one of Harry's last remaining visible links to the institution into which he was born. William walked alone down the corridor, holding the sealed copy tightly. He entered his father's room, placed the envelope on the table, and chose his words carefully. He asked whether the decision was truly final, or only being presented as final to force Harry into compliance. Charles looked at his eldest son for several seconds before answering that a sovereign could not keep drawing lines only to erase them whenever the family objected. William heard the authority in the reply, but he also heard exhaustion. He reminded his father that firm discipline and abandonment can start to look dangerously alike. Charles turned away, knowing his heir was not defending Harry's past choices. He was warning that the crown might win the argument and still lose the family. Princess Anne had given the same caution in a private conversation with her brother. She supported a clear constitutional boundary separating personal family ties from official royal duty, yet she urged him not to confuse exclusion from ceremony with complete emotional exile. and believed Harry could be kept out of state representation without being erased as a son. Camilla spoke more softly. The country would discuss the order for weeks, she told Charles, but Harry would remember only one fact: his father had signed it himself. The Queen Consort watched him take in those words. The king said nothing because there was nothing that could make them less true. Thousands of miles away, Meghan saw an unexpected palace number appear on Harry's phone. She watched his face change before he even picked it up. He ignored the first call, then stood in silence as it rang again. The Duke knew palace officials did not call repeatedly without serious reason, and beneath his anger a sense of fear appeared. Harry finally answered. Meghan stayed close while he listened without interrupting. Then the formal words came. His Majesty had approved a permanent change to Harry's participation in state functions. His first question was not whether the decision could be appealed. He wanted to know which single event had finally pushed his father past the point of restraint. The final order had not grown from years of tension alone. One specific incident turned private frustration into irreversible action. It occurred during preparations for a national remembrance ceremony when a confidential conversation became a direct challenge to the king's authority. Those present later described the moment as brief, controlled, and almost painfully quiet. Yet from that exchange came the decision that would permanently separate Harry from the ceremonial life of the crown. Charles had resisted that outcome longer than many around him realized. Public interviews, disputed private talks, memoir revelations, and repeated disputes over security, titles, access, and royal duty had damaged the relationship. Still, the king had believed occasional ceremonial appearances might keep one narrow bridge open to his younger son. A national remembrance service, an official ceremony honoring sacrifice and collective loss. And it carried special weight because it belonged to the country rather than only to the family. Harry entered the private palace sitting room already tense. No cameras were present and no aides sat between them. The Duke had been told he could attend the service at St. Paul's Cathedral as a relative, but he would not walk in the sovereign's procession. The formal entrance reserved for working representatives of the crown. He wanted that decision changed. Charles kept his voice steady. He explained that Harry's place within the family had not been denied, yet official representation required active service and clear responsibility. Allowing an exception, the king believed, would confuse the public and weaken the line between private birthright and present duty. More painfully, it would suggest ceremonial status could be reclaimed without accepting the obligations that came with it. Harry answered with controlled bitterness. He told his father that inviting him privately while excluding him publicly reduced him to someone the palace could acknowledge when convenient and hide when inconvenient. The Duke argued he had served the institution for years and should not be treated like a guest at a ceremony tied to his own family's history. Charles stiffened when the conversation shifted. Harry warned that if the arrangement stayed unchanged, he would publicly explain why he had been kept out. The younger son meant the statement as self-defense. The king heard something far more dangerous, pressure aimed directly at a state occasion. William entered moments later and stopped. Both men were standing. The chairs remained unused and the ceremonial papers lay between them. The prince looked first at his brother, then at his father, but neither offered an explanation. Harry walked past him without saying goodbye. The silence grew heavier after the door closed. Charles ordered the papers removed and refused to continue the discussion. A documented palace account later recorded his decisive words: "No act of state can be negotiated through the threat of public retaliation." The king then instructed his constitutional advisors to prepare a permanent framework rather than another temporary compromise. What began as an argument over one procession was now moving toward a direct confrontation over identity, loyalty, and who still had the right to stand beside the crown. The final meeting took place without aides, lawyers, or private secretaries. For the first time since the dispute began, Charles and Harry sat alone with nothing between them except the unsigned order resting on a small table. One spoke as a father desperate to be understood. The other answered as a son convinced he had already been judged. Before the meeting ended, both would realize that affection could no longer shield them from the consequences of their choices. Harry arrived at Windsor expecting another discussion about the remembrance ceremony. Instead, he saw the draft order beside his father's chair and understood at once that the argument had become something larger.